I was driving home late, headlights cutting through the thick fog that had settled over the streets. It was one of those nights that felt heavier somehow, like the city itself was watching you from the shadows. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional hum of my car engine as I made my way down nearly empty streets. Then, out of nowhere, I spotted something, or rather someone, just standing in the middle of the road. I swerved, barely missing them. I slammed on the brakes and checked my rearview mirror, hoping I hadn't hit them. There was no one there, just an empty road. Shaken, I rolled down my window to let in some fresh air. The night was so quiet, too quiet. But as I sat there, catching my breath, I noticed something strange. There was a faint clicking sound, almost like someone's nails tapping against the concrete. It was coming closer. Then I saw it. A shadowy figure, moving unnaturally, almost slithering. It came into the streetlight, and I froze. It looked like a person, but not quite. They were moving low to the ground, contorted, almost spider-like. They crawled forward with jerky movements, their limbs twisting in ways a human's shouldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away, and as I stared, they turned their head and locked eyes with me. There was a flicker of something in those eyes, something animalistic, predatory. I realized then that they'd noticed me watching. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 as quietly as I could. 911. What's your emergency? I whispered into the receiver. There's someone in the street. I don't know what they're doing, but it's not right. I think they need help. Or maybe I do. The operator's voice was calm, but urgent. Stay in your vehicle, sir. Don't make any sudden movements. Officers are on their way. I kept the phone close, my heart hammering in my chest as I watched the figure crawling towards my car. They stopped just a few feet away and raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, pointing right at me. Then they grinned. It wasn't a friendly grin. It was more like the smile of someone who had just figured out how they were going to catch their prey. Within minutes, the street was flooded with flashing blue and red lights. The creature, or whatever it was, slithered back into the darkness as the police arrived. I thought I was safe. I thought that was the end of it. But when I looked back down at my phone, I noticed something chilling. There was a video recording in my recent files, a recording from my phone, but I hadn't started it. The video was just a minute long, showing the shadowy figure, closer than they'd been before, their face inches from my car window. They were looking directly into the camera, grinning as if they'd been waiting all along. The officers tapped on my window, jolting me out of my frozen state. I fumbled with the door handle, desperate to get out of the car, away from the thing I'd seen. One officer, his face stern but calm, asked me to explain what had happened. I stammered out what I'd seen, the figure, their unnatural movements, the video that had somehow appeared on my phone. I handed my phone to him, and he played the video. But as soon as it started, his expression changed. His face tightened, and he exchanged a glance with his partner, a silent communication I couldn't decode. The officer took a step back, holding my phone up to show his partner. "This isn't just a break-in," he said under his breath. I barely caught it, but the words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, dread building in my chest. They didn't answer right away. Instead, the other officer, a woman with a no-nonsense look about her, looked at me with a seriousness that told me I wasn't getting out of this easily. "Sir, we need you to come with us to the station. There's something we need to show you." I didn't want to go anywhere with them, but I also didn't want to stay out there on the street alone, not after what I'd seen. So I followed them to the cruiser, leaving my car behind. At the station, they led me into a dimly lit room, a cold metal table, and 2 chairs in the center. They sat me down, and I could feel the weight of their silence as they prepared whatever it was they wanted me to see. The officer who had taken my phone returned with a file, thick and worn, the corners fraying as if it had been handled too many times. He dropped it on the table in front of me, opened it, and turned it around. Inside was a stack of black and white photos, each one capturing different people, each with the same twisted expression, frozen in fear or horror, their bodies contorted as if they'd been pulled apart and put back together wrong. And then I saw a face I recognized, my own. It was a still from the video on my phone, my face in the car, staring out into the darkness, my expression mirroring the fear of the others. "How?" I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. "How did you get this?" The officer looked at me, a flash of something almost like pity in his eyes. "You're not the first person to encounter this thing, and you won't be the last. We don't know where it came from or what it wants, but it has a pattern. It appears, usually late at night, in nearly deserted areas, and anyone who sees it, anyone who gets close enough to make eye contact, ends up on film, like it's collecting them." "Collecting?" I asked, the weight of the word pressing on my chest. "Yes," the officer continued. "Every single person in these photos disappeared shortly after their encounter. No trace of them, just these images that somehow show up in our database. We don't know how. No leads, no signs of struggle, just gone." I felt the room spinning, the officer's words barely registering. I looked down at the stack of photos, seeing person after person, all of them staring back at me with that look of terror, as if they'd known exactly what was coming. I finally managed to choke out, "So, what happens to me?" The officer didn't answer. Instead, he slid my phone back across the table, the screen still glowing with the video paused on that last, chilling frame. The shadowy figure, their eyes boring into mine, that grin, wide, hungry. "Sir," the officer said quietly, "if I were you, I wouldn't go home tonight. And if you do, don't look in any mirrors. Don't pick up if someone calls you from an unknown number. And whatever you do, don't watch that video again." I left the station in a daze, not even sure if I was awake or dreaming. I walked for hours, the city streets empty and silent, that weight still pressing down on me. Finally, as dawn began to break, I found myself back near my car, parked exactly where I'd left it. Just as I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, heart racing, and looked down at the screen. A message notification from an unknown number. I stared at it, my finger hovering over the screen, every part of me screaming not to open it. But I couldn't stop myself. The message opened, and my blood turned to ice. "Smile, you're on camera." And then, as if in response to some command I couldn't hear, my phone camera switched on and showed my own reflection, wide-eyed and terrified. And behind me, in the screen's reflection, that figure was standing, their grins stretched wider than ever, waiting to collect. It was 2 a.m., and I was driving home from a late shift at the station. The streets were empty, the city bathed in that strange glow that only seemed to come alive in the dead of night. I was still buzzing from the call earlier, a strange one, even by my standards as a cop. Dispatch had sent me to a complaint about bizarre noises in an old warehouse district that hadn't been used for years. But when I got there, it was nothing, just the dark and silence that settled so heavy it made you feel like you were being watched. I shrugged it off, though. The job sometimes does that to you, messes with your head, makes you jump at shadows. But what I didn't realize was that tonight, shadows would be the least of my worries. Just as I was about a mile from home, my radio crackled. "Hey, you near 5th and Waverly? We've got another report. Suspicious noises. Possible break-in." I sighed. "Lucky me," I muttered, swinging the wheel and heading toward the address. If nothing else, I'd make a quick pass, check it out, and clock out. But as I pulled up to the street, something felt off. The house was dark, except for a dim light coming from the attic window. It was flickering, like a candle or a lantern. Definitely not the kind of light you expect to see in a house at this hour. I switched off my headlights and called in my location, just in case. Then, with a flashlight in hand, I started toward the house. As I got closer, I could hear something faint, almost like scratching. I stood at the foot of the porch, straining to listen. It wasn't just scratching. It sounded like someone whispering, but the voice was so low, it seemed to blend with the hum of the night. I steeled myself and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time, the sound echoing through the silence. Then the door creaked open. I shone my flashlight into the foyer, half expecting to see some squatter, or maybe a raccoon that had gotten inside. But there was no movement, only the dim light from the attic flickering above me. Something told me not to go in. I can't explain it. Maybe it was a cop's instinct, that gut feeling that tells you when things are about to go sideways. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I called, stepping inside. The air was thick and musty, like no one had set foot in here for years. My voice seemed to vanish as soon as it left my mouth, swallowed up by the silence. I took a few more steps, aiming my flashlight down a narrow hallway, the beam catching glimpses of old, dust-covered furniture and cracked walls. Then I saw it, a figure at the top of the stairs. I froze, my heart pounding. It was a woman, standing so still she almost seemed like a statue. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide and dark, and her mouth was twisted in a grimace of fear or pain. But the strangest part was her hands. They were covering her ears, like she was trying to block out some terrible sound. "Ma'am, are you okay?" My voice came out a little shaky, but I forced myself to stay calm. Slowly, she took her hands from her ears and pointed up. The attic. I glanced up, the light still flickering through the cracks of the attic door. When I looked back down, the woman was gone. The woman's sudden disappearance sent a chill down my spine. My training kicked in. I reminded myself that I had backup on the way. But there was something deeply unsettling about this house, something I couldn't shake, and the flickering light in the attic felt like it was calling me. Against my better judgment, I started up the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, filling the house with sounds that seemed to grow louder and louder. When I reached the top, the attic door was right there, cracked open just a sliver. A faint, rotten smell drifted through the gap. Holding my breath, I pushed it open with the tip of my flashlight, the door swinging inward on rusty hinges. The attic was pitch black except for a single candle in the center of the room casting a weak, shivering light. And in the candlelight, I saw them. Faces. Plastered across the attic walls, covering every inch, were dozens of black and white photographs. Faces of men, women, even children, all staring out with hollow, terrified eyes. I felt an involuntary shudder run down my spine as I realized each face was covered in strange marks, some kind of symbols, crudely scratched into the photos. I stepped closer, trying to make sense of it all, and that's when I noticed something even worse. One of the photographs. It was me. A picture of me, in uniform, standing by my patrol car, the same terrified symbols etched across my face. That's when I heard it again, that faint scratching sound. But this time, It wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from above. I tilted my head up, shining the flashlight on the rafters, and my blood went cold. There, crouched in the corner of the attic ceiling, was a figure, barely visible in the darkness. It was humanoid, but twisted, its limbs stretched at unnatural angles, its fingers claw-like, digging into the wood. Its eyes, wide and sunken, glowed faintly as it stared down at me. For a split second, we locked eyes, and I felt a cold, paralyzing fear unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And then it moved. The thing dropped from the ceiling with a sickening crack, landing inches from where I stood. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering as it hit the ground. Into the half-light, I saw its face, a warped, grotesque reflection of the woman I'd seen at the top of the stairs. Only now, her mouth was twisted into a hideous grin, her teeth sharp and glistening in the candlelight. It lunged at me. I scrambled backward, my hand reaching desperately for my radio. I managed to hit the call button, barely able to choke out a word before the thing was on me, its icy fingers clawing at my neck. Its grip tightened, the world dimming around me as I struggled to breathe. But just as the darkness began to close in, a burst of light filled the attic, the backup unit's flashlight beam. The creature hissed and recoiled, scuttling back into the shadows like a spider. I heard footsteps racing up the stairs, and within moments, 2 officers burst into the attic, their lights illuminating every corner. But the creature was gone. They found me half-conscious, gasping for air as I clutched at my neck, the scratch marks burning into my skin. They led me downstairs, still dazed and barely able to comprehend what had just happened. I could hardly speak. When I tried to explain, the words sounded insane, even to me. But the strangest part came later, when they processed the scene. They took down the photos, documented the symbols, searched every inch of the attic and found nothing. No sign of the creature, no footprints, no trace that anyone or anything had ever been there. I knew what I saw, and every night since, I still see those eyes staring back at me, waiting in the darkness. I don't know if it was some kind of spirit or demon or something far worse. All I know is that it's still out there, watching, waiting, and one day, it's coming back for me.